Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of our look at Extra History's Easter Rising. If you did not see part 1 of my reaction, there's a link in the description that will take you back to the beginning, as well as the link to the original content if you want to watch it without my commentary. As with all of the channels I do reactions to, I invite you to support them, give them a view, give them a subscription. Support those channels because they are teaching history in a very unique way, and we have the privilege of being able to use their teaching tools to talk even further in depth about topics. So I'm grateful for them. Folks like Extra History, there's a reason we do a lot of their stuff, because they have a great way of telling the stories, and they use some top-notch animation to do it. So we're going to dive into this. I am in the final stretch of my plans and my preparation for my trip to Belgium. I'll be leaving Sunday afternoon. Can't wait. Trying to get some research done. If you want to follow me on Instagram, if you use Instagram, you can do that. The Instagram link's going to show up here in just a second. It's also down in the description typically. But I'll be posting stuff every single day from my time there. So you get to see a lot of stuff you might not otherwise get to see. All right, let's dive into part 2.
The German Club, New York City. August 24th, 1914, 2 years before the Rising.
So just for context here, August 24th, 1914, we are just a couple weeks into the First World War. Germany invades Belgium, I think on the 4th of August. So that's really, declarations of war have happened, but that's when action begins. So this is 3 weeks into the war.
2 groups of men file in and take their seats. The air tense with expectation. The First World War rages, the U.S. has yet to pick a side, and German officials in America are working hard to extend their country's influence behind the scenes. Today's meeting is part of that operation. One of the 2 groups consists of German dignitaries, an ambassador, a military attaché, a banker, and a journalist. Many of them are spies, working to disrupt ties between the United States and the Entente. And they are led by the cordial but unreadable Johann Heinrich von Bernstorff.
And it's also important to point out that a large chunk of Americans at this point identify as German American. It's actually the largest single group in terms of who people identify with as far as their ancestry goes. Especially in places like Pennsylvania and Ohio and the upper Midwest. A lot of German ties there, and a lot of people are heavily leaning towards Germany and the Central Powers. This is not a clear-cut thing where there's a good side and a bad side.
A Prussian count and ambassador. The other party considers themselves a diplomatic delegation, albeit for a state that doesn't exist yet. They are Irish nationalists, some American-born, but others from Ireland. The nationalists make their proposal. They want German assistance in defeating their mutual enemy, the British, and they ask for only 2 things: weapons and military expertise.
Interesting. And also, it should be pointed out that one of the other largest groups of people in America would be Irish Americans, especially in big cities like New York City, Boston, places on the East Coast. So it'd be a lot of support for both of these groups in terms of them banding together against the British.
Von Bernstorff listens intently and promises to contact his superiors to see what can be done. Because if he can help raise rebellion in Ireland, the war could really be over by Christmas.
So if they could quickly, I'm just kind of thinking through this out loud, if they could quickly get a major rebellion going in Ireland, which I don't know how they'd quickly do that, because number one, how are you going to get large amounts of guns to the Irish when you've got the British Navy out there, which is the largest and most powerful in the world, and is probably more than any other factor going to be responsible for bringing the Germans to their knees in this war. But if you could do that quickly, yes, it would make a difference, because at this stage in the war, if Germany can break through the Allied line in Belgium, if they can get through to Paris, if they can quickly force some kind of settlement in the West before the British, it's going to take the British a year or 2 to get there in large numbers anyway. If the British are distracted at home, they're not going to be able to do that. But I feel like the opportunity is going to pass pretty quickly for that.
Thanks so much to World Anvil for helping us forge today's historical tale. Last episode, we explored the background causes of the Easter Rising and how politics, both in Parliament and the streets, led to the moment in 1916 where people went for their rifles. Today, though, we want to rewind a little bit and go back to 1914 to trace the web of spies and backroom operators trying to put those rifles into revolutionary hands. By the later half of 1914, preparations for an Irish nationalist uprising were already well underway. A shadowy faction of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, calling itself the Military Council, was forging ahead, hoping to strike while Britain was embroiled in a world war. But to succeed, the plotters knew they'd need help from overseas. Both Germany and America seemed like natural allies, the former because it was at war with Britain and would benefit from a revolt, and the latter because it contained a large Irish population which included militant nationalists. In fact, in the 1860s and 70s, an Irish-American radical group known as the Fenian Brotherhood had repeatedly invaded Canada as a way to pressure the British to leave Ireland. As a result, Irish nationalists traveled to the U.S. hoping to secure funding from Irish Americans and support from German diplomats. Foremost among those operatives was Roger Casement. A former British diplomat, Casement had become disillusioned with the Empire and embraced the nationalist cause. On his visits, he met with both senior Irish Americans and German officials such as von Bernstorff.
So this is a really important ally to have on your side, somebody who's been in the British government so they understand how certain things work. They also have made a name for themselves. They're going to be familiar to people within the British government. So that gives some legitimacy to this movement. It also gives them some inside info, but also and maybe some back channels through which they can work to get what they want. I don't know how it's all going to shake out, though.
But progress was slow. So, in late 1914, Casement decided to go to the source. He traveled to Germany in disguise, narrowly dodging British spies along the way. Once in Berlin, he became one of several Irish nationalists courted by German nobles and diplomats, and through those connections, secured nominal backing from the Kaiser.
Who, let's not forget, Kaiser Wilhelm is the eldest grandchild of Queen Victoria. He is a nephew of, well, no, he's not. He's a nephew of Edward VII, who has now died by 1910. Then you get George V, who's Kaiser Wilhelm's first cousin. Their parents are brother and sister.
That done, he started a new project, recruiting a force of Irish nationalists out of Irish prisoners of war, captured while serving in the British Army. Casement visited POW camps in Germany, one holding 2,000 Irish prisoners, in hopes to raise a German-led and armed legion that could join the planned uprising. Yet his plea for Irish unity seemed to fall on deaf ears. Less than 60 men volunteered, and he abandoned the effort after, according to one American diplomat, quote, "The remaining Irishmen chased him out of the camp."
That's interesting. So these are guys that have been captured by the Germans in World War I. And he goes there expecting them to be in favor of this. But you got to remember, at this point, there's not really conscription. So if they're fighting, they're volunteers. And if they're volunteers, that means they were willing to serve the British Army. So a bit of a miscalculation on his part to think that these are the guys that are going to support your cause.
It was an ill omen, and not the only one. The Germans had supplied him with fewer weapons than he'd hoped for, and no military advisors. Disillusioned, in April 1916, Casement boarded a German U-boat and prepared to return to Ireland in hopes to put off the rising before it ended in disaster. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, matters were close to spiraling out of control. The IRB's military council had to keep its planned rising a secret.
So, he mentioned the U-boat there, and that was something when I said earlier, I wonder how they would get large numbers of weapons to the Irish. U-boats would be the way. There's no sonar, anything like that. So U-boat's a pretty safe way to be able to smuggle things to Ireland until the British get wind of it and then park some destroyers off the coast of these different ports to prevent it from happening.
Not only to avoid discovery by the British, but also to hide their plans from their own organization. The president of the IRB, nominally the council's parent group, didn't feel the time was right for a rising, a view shared by the commander of the Irish Volunteers, Owen MacNeill. But despite this, many Irish volunteer officers owed their loyalty to the military council and could be relied upon to fight if the military council called for it. And to add yet more daggers and cloaks to this cloak and dagger convention, there was a small nationalist faction, even more determined to stage an uprising than the IRB's military council. The Irish Citizen Army, led by former British soldier James Connolly, saw themselves as socialist revolutionaries and were planning a rebellion of their own.
So again, you've got different factions who want different things, right? You've got some who just want independence, some who want independence, but the new government needs to be socialist afterwards, and some are going to want independence, but let's determine our own fate. And so can you get those groups united long enough to achieve the goal they all agree on before they then fight amongst themselves about what comes next? That's a great question.
Knowing that disunity would invite destruction, the military council secretly reached out to the firebrand Connolly, inviting him to join them rather than strike out alone. To the council's relief, Connolly accepted.
There's an old saying, it's a little bit crude, but it's basically something to the effect of better to have them inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in, right? It's the idea of keep your enemies close, or keep the people you need to watch close. It's what Abraham Lincoln did. He put all of his rivals for the Republican nomination for president, all who thought they could do a better job than him, he put them on his cabinet where he could keep an eye on them, but he also recognized that they were important allies to have.
It was time for the next stage of the plot. On the 19th of April, 1916, the Military Council published a forged document that detailed British plans to arrest senior nationalists. The council then informed officers in the Irish Volunteers that the rising would begin Easter Sunday. Of course, nationalists with lukewarm views about the rising, like Owen McNeill, were kept in the dark.
So again, to give some context to what's happening, this is April 1916. The Battle of Verdun is raging on the Western Front. France and Germany are in an absolute bloodbath outside of Verdun. In the meantime, by this point, the British are planning one of their biggest offensives of the war at the Somme. It's just a couple of months away, and so they've got their hands full with that, and then this is going to erupt right in the middle of that time.
But revolutionary circles are small, and a rising's hard to keep quiet. McNeill found out and panicked. He issued a countermanding order, instructing the Irish Volunteers not to take part in the uprising. Chaos ensued. Irish Volunteers had to choose whether to follow McNeill's orders or the Military Council. And amidst the confusion, some retrieved hidden weapons and prepared to fight, while others left them in lofts and barns, believing it would be better for the cause if they stayed at home. And on top of that, another drama was playing out at sea. Off the coast of Carey Island, Good Friday, April 21st, 1916. The German naval captain checks his charts. The maps are in Norwegian, and he has no radio on board. His ship, the SS Libau, currently disguised as a neutral Norwegian vessel, is deep in British waters. And within the Libau's hold, concealed beneath a cargo of timber, are 20,000 rifles, 1,000,000 rounds of ammunition, and 10 machine guns.
And this kind of stuff happened on both sides. That the British would do the same thing. They would smuggle in things like gun cotton, things like ammunition from the United States in the holds of ships like the Lusitania, disguised as neutral passenger vessels so that they wouldn't be attacked by German submarines. So it was a pretty standard thing that was happening a lot.
They're the German Empire's contribution to the imminent rising, and while the shipment is smaller than the nationalists hoped, it still dwarfs the last gun running at Howth 2 years earlier. But when the ship arrives, there's no one to collect the guns. The captain is in the right place, but at the wrong time. Irish nationalists are expecting to meet him 2 days later. None are present along the coast to guide the German ship to shore, and the captain's worst fears quickly materialize. 3 Royal Navy destroyers appear on the horizon. They hail him, and he responds with his false identity. Thinking the Norwegian ship is lost, they escort the Libau into Cork Harbor. And knowing they'll be searched, the Libau's captain gives orders to place scuttling charges rather than reveal his cargo. After a series of thudding detonations, the weapons meant to ensure Irish independence sank into the depths within sight of Cork Harbor.
Had no idea.
That Easter weekend, it seemed as though everything that could go wrong had gone wrong for the Military Council. Confusion reigned among the rank and file thanks to McNeill's counterorder, and the desperately needed German arms and ammunition had been sunk. And to top things off, Roger Casement, who was supposed to link up with the weapons shipment, had been deposited by a German U-boat on the Irish coast. Ill from a recurring bout of malaria, he was found and arrested by an Irish policeman. Now, the local Irish volunteers might have attempted a rescue, but they were under orders not to make any moves before Easter Sunday in case it tipped the authorities off. Everything now seemed in doubt. Ironically, the British were aware of almost all of this. Not only had they successfully intercepted both Casement and the nationalist arms shipment, but the very idea of staging an uprising during Easter had been leaked to various senior sources.
The British have always been excellent at their counter-espionage efforts. I mean, they're the ones who discover the Zimmerman telegram and eventually turn it over to the Americans. They're the ones who do a lot of the work in breaking Enigma during World War II. It wasn't just the Americans. The Polish had a lot to do with it as well. And others, I mean, not the Americans, the Brits. But the British have always been very, very good at this. So this doesn't surprise me even a little bit.
And some historians have even suggested that parts of the British establishment actually wanted a rising to happen, as it would allow future crackdowns on the nationalist movement.
Yep.
But it seems, however, that most of the authorities were simply too slow to act on the intelligence they received. And in that sense, finally, the nationalists experienced some luck. The military council delayed the rising from Easter Sunday to Easter Monday, allowing them to meet and decide whether or not to go ahead with their plans. They voted on it and raised hands. They would carry on. One of their members, barrister, writer, and committed revolutionary Patrick Pearse, who 6 months earlier had delivered a speech to a nationalist crowd that had ended with the words, "Ireland unfree shall never be at peace," was elected president of the Irish Republic. Orders were to strike the following day. For better or worse, the uprising was going ahead, and the military council would now make certain that Pearse's words were no empty threat. The time for oration, negotiation, and deals in the dark was over, and the time for actions had arrived.
Interesting. All right, well, we see where this is going. I've been told that this is probably a 5-part series. Only 3 parts are out so far. I think part 4 will probably be out this weekend, which means part 5 will come out while I'm in Belgium, so I'll probably not get to the reaction on part 5 until I get back. But in the meantime, make sure you're subscribed and you have your notifications on. And I'd also encourage you to subscribe to the VTH Originals channel because I will be posting some things there that may not end up on this channel associated with my recent trip to the UK. So check that out. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.